Gavin Martin from Cornerstone, talking about what happens when you've paid off your car loan. What do you do with that surplus cash flow that used to go into your car repayments? Now you've got a few extra spare dollars. What do you say to people when you're in a conversation with them, perhaps even in a professional sense they're giving advice on what you should do with that spare cash? Is there a rule of thumb as this is what you do?
Yes, definitely there is. I would encourage people, if they have paid off their car loan, to break the cycle of taking out car leases, or sometimes called fleeces by some commentators, and put the money towards a savings account that they can use to then buy a new car in a number of years once they've saved up the funds to actually go and do so. Pay cash for that car rather than taking out a lease. It's incredible the amount of interest that's paid and the fees that go into those lease arrangements, and often the problem is that when you go to buy a new car, you haven't got the funds available. So I encourage people down that track, or alternatively putting the money against other debt that they have, whether that be the family home, mortgage debt, or other investment debt. Possibly, if that's not your scenario, then going ahead and then investing the money and creating some wealth for yourself.
So you're putting the repayments towards debt, or you're putting it towards a new car loan, because cars don't last forever. Eventually the one you're driving is probably going to wear out or get to a point where you want to trade it in and get a better one, perhaps even a new car, or then move it into some level of investment. So that's going to depend. Everyone's different, different circumstances that people are under. What about the issues of, you mentioned, leasing. There's all sorts of ways that you can buy a car. Of course, you can have a bank loan, you could have finance company loans. Is there any better one of those when you're talking about how you pursue buying a car?
Yes, I encourage people to pay cash if they possibly can. The next best option is if you do package it through your salary. If you're not going to pay cash, then that's probably better because you get some tax advantages through doing that. Then I guess it's about a personal loan, and that's probably the least desirable scenario. You could then also use your mortgage as well, but ideally you wouldn't actually borrow to invest in assets that go down in value. That's generally what, from a financial perspective, you would avoid. And it's interesting, when you come across somebody who's in a bit of stress, debt stress, one of the quickest and easiest wins that you can get on the board is to, often there's two cars that are worth $20,000 to $40,000 each. You can quickly sell those cars, pay down the loans, buy $2,000 or $3,000 cars, and they've generally taken sort of $500 to $1,000 off the monthly budget, and they've reduced a lot of pressure from their living circumstances.
So it's just a little act of humility there, is not driving the newer, brighter, shinier car, but actually going with something that's a little more second-hand, but the payoff is big, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very countercultural, Neil, to drive the older car these days, but they say that you should drive the car the car of least value that your ego can handle. So it's definitely well worthwhile doing.
I can't recall if I've ever spoken to you about this before, but there was one scenario I came across some years ago where a friend was paying a very high car loan repayment to drive a nicer car, because in church life there was a sense in which there was a feeling that you should drive a nice car in church life. Now, that's got a whole lot of big issues to do with it. What are your thoughts when it comes to the idea of keeping up with the Joneses, and particularly the other cars in the church car park?
I think this is a really interesting one, and it's all about the concept of perceived wealth as well. I often remember going back to my country town upbringing. There were some particular, older gentlemen around that were driving these really old cars, and you think, man, they mustn't be very wealthy at all. But you'll find actually, I found out later that they're actually very wealthy people, but they just choose to drive old cars that aren't worth very much. I think the one of the wealthiest men in the world, Warren Buffett, drives a car that's of several years old, that's just of a standard type vehicle. So I think we need to move away from this whole perception that you need to be driving the flashiest car and get down to the basics.
It is a mindset thing, isn't it? And I guess if you actually apply your biblical foundation, a Christian mindset to the type of car you drive, you probably are more likely to settle on the idea of having a more humble car than a flashy one. But as you say, everyone's different, and some people, perhaps in their profession, they might need to drive a flashier car.
Yes, exactly. I'm not saying that everybody should drive an old car. I'm just suggesting that if you're going to buy a car, don't go out and borrow a lot of money to do it, but if you can pay cash for it or you can structure it well within your particular budget, then I think that's fine.
There's that whole thing too, the perception of being blessed because you buy a nice car. That's an interesting one to pop the lid off on, because the blessing of God not necessarily connected with whether you drive a nice car or not.
Yeah, exactly. I was in a group a number of years ago, and I guess as part of that group we would pray for people's circumstances, and one of the gentlemen in the group said, we've been blessed by the bank allowing us to take out a car loan so we can buy a better car. And I really struggled with it at the time, because I thought, is that a blessing to have more debt to go and buy a car that's going to decrease in value? And I guess for his particular circumstances it may have needed to meet their particular need at the time, but I really struggled with the whole concept of, is that a blessing or a curse at that particular time?